welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into that really interesting, sometimes, let's be honest, frustrating stage of mastering English. Hitting that C1 level, especially in listening and speaking.
Right.
You know, I like to think of it like this. You've built the house, the structure's solid, the rooms are all there,
Yeah.
but now the real work starts. Learning to actually live in it, comfortably, confidently.
That's a great way to put it because, look, at C1, you're generally past worrying about the basic grammar rules or core vocabulary. You've got that foundation.
Right.
The whole game changes then.
Yeah.
It becomes about navigating, well, all the subtleties, doesn't it? Understanding this huge range of accents out there, dealing with spontaneous speech, which is just unpredictable,
Totally.
and really getting your head around complex, abstract ideas.
And this is often where you hear people talk about hitting that C1 plateau, isn't it? That feeling where you're good, but maybe not seeing the same dramatic jumps in progress you used to.
Absolutely. Can feel like you're just sort of stuck in one place.
Yeah.
So our mission here, drawing directly from the material you've shared, is to lay out some concrete strategies, ways to push past that plateau.
Okay.
And we're focusing on two main things. First, how to really sharpen that advanced listening skill. And second, how to boost your speaking so it feels genuinely fluent and, well, sophisticated.
Okay, let's get into it. C1 listening, it's clearly more than just, did I get the merit point? What are we actually aiming for?
Well, it's about digging much deeper. It's about picking up on what's implied, understanding the speaker's tone, recognizing sarcasm. That's a big one for learners.
Oh, yeah.
And crucially, understanding what's not being said directly, but is, strongly hinted at. The expectation, really, is that you can follow abstract ideas, figure out the speaker's attitude, their underlying feeling, and keep up with complicated arguments, even if they're speaking quickly or have an accent you're not used to hearing.
I know from, trying other languages myself, there are always hurdles. What are some common ones people hit right at the C1 listening stage?
Okay, one of the biggest, almost a classic, is what you might call the panic on a word issue.
Ah.
You're listening along, it's all fine, then bam, one unfamiliar word. And your brain just fixates on it, trying to decode it.
Right, and you miss everything else.
Exactly. While you're stuck on that one word, the conversation just races ahead, and you've completely lost the thread. It's incredibly common.
Oh, I've definitely been there. Your mind just freezes. So frustrating.
It happens to practically everyone. And another related thing is passive listening.
Right.
Having English radio on or a show in the background.
Better than nothing.
Maybe, but at C1, that kind of background noise just isn't enough for deep comprehension. You really need active, focused engagement to train your ear properly at this level.
Right. So, okay, our brains are naturally good at spotting patterns, but for C1 listening, you're saying we need to consciously train them for specific things.
Precisely. You need to train your brain for anticipation, predicting what might come next based on the context, for actively connecting the dots between different ideas people are raising,
I see.
and using the surrounding language, the tone, the situation to kind of fill in the gaps intuitively when you miss something. It's about developing a more sophisticated, predictive listening sense.
That makes total sense. Let's make this concrete. Tell me about Kenji. His story about C1 listening seemed really resonant in the materials we looked at.
Kenji is a perfect example. He's a software engineer, originally from Japan, moved to London for his job. Now, on paper, his English was excellent. Passed formal C1 test, no problem.
Okay.
But the reality, the day-to-day of a busy London office, wow, that was a whole different ballgame.
I can just picture it. The noise, different British accents maybe flying around, that fast, informal chat, people talking over each other.
He said it was exactly like that. Overwhelming. He described it as like understanding the individual words, but the whole sentence just wouldn't click in real time.
Or getting the sentence but missing the point.
Yeah. Or missing the joke, the sarcasm. He actually shared a specific time a colleague said something like, oh, that's a bit rich, meaning, that's hypocritical coming from you.
Right.
But Kenji heard rich and thought they meant expensive or something about money. Totally missed the irony.
Huh. Yeah, those nuances are everything. So what changed for him? What was the turning point?
He had this British mentor who gave him some advice he called ridiculously simple but life-changing.
Okay.
The mentor basically said, Kenji, stop trying so hard to catch every single word. You're missing the forest for the trees. Listen for the melody of the conversation.
The melody, I like that. What does that actually mean practically?
It means focusing on the overall flow, the intonation, the main idea being expressed, the feeling behind the words,
Yeah.
even watching people's faces more closely.
Ah, so shifting focus from just the words to the whole communication package.
Exactly. Away from pure decoding towards tuning into the bigger picture.
Brilliant. So how did Kenji actually apply this listen for the melody idea? What did he do?
He got really deliberate about it. He started downloading podcasts, radio shows, specifically seeking out diverse British accents, Mancunian, Scottish, Cockney, you name it, even if at first he only understood bits and pieces.
So targeted exposure.
Yes, and he got into BBC radio dramas,
Yeah.
nuanced British comedies, things like The Office or Peep Show.
Ah, yes, where so much is unspoken or in the awkwardness.
Exactly. He'd watch with English subtitles first to get the gist, then watch the same thing again without any subtitles at all, really forcing his ear to do the work.
Okay.
He also started focusing consciously on intonation patterns
Yeah.
and learning common phrasal verbs and idioms, but in context, not just memorizing lists.
Right, how they're actually used.
And he really tuned into discourse markers, those little connecting words and phrases like mind you or having said that, or to cut a long story
The
short.
signposts, yeah, the
Yeah.
words that tell you where the speaker's thought process is heading.
Precisely. He saw them as road signs guiding him through the conversation structure. He trained himself to listen for them specifically.
And the outcome of all this effort.
He said that within about 6 months, his listening felt genuinely transformed. He wasn't just, slowly decoding words anymore. He was grasping meaning in real time.
Wow.
He could follow fast group chats. He started picking up on implied meanings, the humor, the sarcasm. And importantly, he felt much more natural jumping into conversations himself. His experience really shows C1 listening is like learning this intricate dance of communication.
That's a fantastic outcome. So for listeners wanting to develop that kind of advanced listening, what specific techniques can they start using based on the sources?
Okay, several key techniques stood out. First, actively practice selective attention and prediction. So instead of straining to catch every single sound, train your brain to zero in on the keywords, the speaker's likely intention. Try to anticipate what might come next.
So you're engaging proactively, not just passively receiving.
Exactly. Second, get good at contextual inference. When you hit an unknown word, don't freeze. Use the surrounding words, the tone, the topic, all the clues to make an educated guess. Be a kind of language detective.
I like that language detective. Use the clues.
And mental summarization is another powerful one. As someone's talking, just quickly, mentally, rephrase their main points in your own words. Like, okay, so the argument is X because of Y. If you can't do that, you've probably missed a key part.
Right. It forces active processing of the meaning.
It does. And, as Kenji found, really pay attention to discourse markers and signposting words. Learn what, on the other hand, consequently, in fact, to sum up, are signaling. They are your road signs.
Got it. Those little navigational cues.
Yes. And finally, maybe most importantly at this level, actively listen for tone, emotion, and implication. How something is said, the pitch, the stress, the speed, often carries as much or even more meaning than the words themselves. You've got to dig beneath the surface.
Okay, lots of techniques. What about the actual material, the sources, stressed variety? What kind of stuff should people be listening to?
Absolutely. Variety is crucial. And ideally, find stuff you're genuinely interested in. If you love science, find advanced science podcasts in English. History buff, find history documentaries. Think outside the box of traditional language learning materials.
Any specific examples mentioned?
Yeah, things like NPR's Up First, BBC Radio 4's In Our Time, The Daily, Stuff You Should Know Freakonomics Radio came up. A good mix of topics, different speakers, different formats, that's what you need.
And visual media, TV shows, documentaries.
Oh, totally essential. Advanced documentaries, like Our Planet or Planet Earth, they use complex language. And
Yep.
sophisticated TV dramas, things like The Crown, Succession, Sherlock, House of Cards, the dialogue is just packed with nuance.
Right.
A really good tactic mentioned was watching an episode with English subtitles. First, to orient yourself, then watching it again right away without subtitles to push your listening comprehension.
That seems like a manageable way to build up. What about things like audiobooks or lectures?
Highly recommended. Especially for training your ear to follow longer, more complex arguments. Challenging audiobooks, university lectures, lots are available online through platforms like Coursera or ADX TED Talks. They force you to sustain focus.
And the big one, dealing with all the different accents.
You just have to embrace accent diversity at C1. You need to actively seek out content featuring speakers from, say, Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, different regions within the US and UK.
Where's a good place to find that?
Honestly, YouTube is a goldmine for this. You can find interviews, talks, vlogs from everywhere. Someone even suggested trying foreign films, but with the English dubs on, just to expose your ear to different vocal styles applied to maybe familiar stories. The goal is to immerse yourself in the global sound of English.
Okay, so diverse immersion is key.
Right.
What about more focused, like drill-type exercises? Did the sources suggest anything there?
Yes. Several really effective, though demanding exercises came up. Transcription drills, for one. Take a short audio clip, maybe 30 seconds, a minute from something challenging. Listen over and over and try to write down everything you hear. Every single word, every contraction, every little sound.
Wow, that sounds intense. Why go into that much detail?
Because it forces your ear to tune into the micro details, individual sounds that might be tricky, how words naturally connect and blend together in speech. It's amazing for catching things you'd normally miss. Comparing it to an official transcript afterwards is even better, if possible.
Okay, what else?
Advanced shadowing. This is where you listen to a native speaker and then immediately repeat what they said, trying to mimic everything of their exact pronunciation, the rhythm, the intonation, the speed, the whole music of their speech. Start with short phrases, maybe just a few seconds long.
So you're not just saying the words, you're trying to replicate the sound and feel.
Exactly. And then there's dictation, which is a bit different. You listen to an audio source and just write down exactly what you hear. It tests your overall accuracy and your auditory memory more broadly.
So transcription for the tiny details, shadowing for the musicality, dictation for overall accuracy.
That's a good way to think about it.
Any tech tools that can help here?
Yeah, language exchange apps that have voice messaging features like Hello Talk or Tandem were mentioned as being surprisingly useful.
How so?
Well, someone sends you a voice message. You have to listen really carefully to understand it properly. Then you have to record your reply. It forces active listening in a real, spontaneous context, and it immediately links into speaking practice, too.
That's a neat practical application. Now, we talked about Kenji dealing with general spontaneous chat. What about mastering listening in a very specific technical field? Dr. Sofia Rodriguez's story came up.
Yes, Dr. Rodriguez. She's a cardiologist from Brazil. Excellent English overall. But she went to this big international medical conference, and she said she felt completely adrift during the discussions.
Even with good English, what was tripping her up?
She realized it wasn't just the complex medical terms themselves, it was also the rapid-fire abbreviations everyone used, the field-specific metaphors, and the way speakers would jump between related topics without maybe explicitly signaling the shift. It felt hard to follow if you weren't deeply immersed in that specific way of talking.
Okay, so how did she tackle that very specialized listening challenge?
She realized she had to immerse herself specifically in English medical communication.
Right.
So she started listening to English language medical podcasts, recordings of clinical reviews, even surgical case presentations.
Right.
At first, she found herself hitting pause all the time to look up terms that panic on a word thing again.
Understandable.
But then she changed her approach. She started listening to whole episodes or talks without stopping constantly. She accepted she wouldn't catch every single technical term right away. Her new focus became understanding the overall discussion.
Like the main points.
Yeah. What's the main problem being discussed? What are the proposed solutions or findings? What's the key takeaway or conclusion? Focusing on the bigger picture.
That sounds way less stressful, focusing on the macro view.
Exactly. And she also started watching recordings of conference talks and hospital grand rounds. But she paid really close attention to how the English-speaking doctors structured their presentations, how they presented data, how they handled Q&A sessions.
Looking at the patterns of communication in that field.
Precisely. She noticed recurring phrases or sort of formulas they often use, things like, our data indicates that, or would politely disagree, maybe, while I appreciate that point, I wonder if, or to summarize, in essence.
So those common phrases became like anchors for her in complex talks.
Exactly. By focusing on those discourse patterns and trusting she could infer a lot of the technical stuff from context, her listening comprehension in her specific field improved dramatically. She called it getting attuned to the symphony of medical English.
I love that phrase.
And the result was, at the next conference she attended, she wasn't just passively following along. She felt confident enough to actually participate in the Q&As, ask clarifying questions, even offer her own perspectives. Her specialized listening really unlocked her professional engagement.
That's incredible. It really
Yeah.
drives home that C1 isn't just about general ability. It's about mastering the specific communication landscape you operate in. Okay, let's pivot now. Let's talk about the other side of the coin, C1 speaking. What does advanced speaking fluency actually look like at this level beyond just making yourself understood?
Right. C1 speaking is definitely way more than just getting the basic message across. It's about being able to express yourself fluently, coherently, and importantly, appropriately in all sorts of different situations.
Okay.
The focus really shifts towards sounding natural, using idioms and colloquialisms correctly, and adapting your language style smoothly depending on who you're talking to and the context. You're expected to be able to handle complex ideas in detail, sustain your side of an extended discussion, argue persuasively, and do it all with a certain level of sophistication.
Even at this high level, though, I know people still feel blocked sometimes when it comes to speaking.
Yeah.
What are the usual sticking points?
Oh, several common ones came up again and again in the sources. A big one is overthinking grammar while you're speaking, constantly monitoring yourself.
Yeah, that leads to hesitations.
Exactly. It makes you sound unnatural and hesitant. Another is relying on the same, maybe comfortable but limited vocabulary and sentence structures, even though passively you know a lot more.
You have the words in your head but can't grab them quickly enough.
That's it. Difficulty with spontaneity is huge too, that feeling when you have to speak off the cuff and your mind just goes totally blank.
The classic deer in headlights moment.
That's the one. And then there are those stubborn fossilized errors, mistakes you've been making for ages that have just become ingrained, even though you know better intellectually. And honestly, a massive barrier for many is simply the fear of making mistakes. It holds people back, makes them afraid to experiment with new language.
Yeah.
That fear factor is very real, even at C1.
It really is. And we can't talk about C1 speaking without leaping back to that vital listening speaking connection we touched on earlier, can we?
No, absolutely not. They are so fundamentally intertwined at this level. All that deep, active listening you do, that's the input. That's the fuel.
Right.
It's feeding your brain the natural patterns, the complex vocabulary, the correct pronunciation, the idiomatic ways of phrasing things.
Yeah.
You really can't consistently produce language features you haven't first absorbed through listening. Input absolutely fuels output.
Such an important point to keep repeating. Input fuels output. Okay, so tell me about Anya. Her story seemed to tackle that spontaneity challenge head on.
Anya's a great case. She was a German philosophy student. Academically, her English was fantastic. Reading dense texts, writing complex essays, no problem. She could manage okay in conversations if she had time to prepare her thoughts. But she really wanted to join the university's English Debate Society, and the thought absolutely terrified her.
I can see why. Debating is like the ultimate spontaneity test, isn't it? Fast, unpredictable.
Totally. She put it perfectly. In a debate, you can't translate in your head. You can't plan perfect sentences. You have to react now, challenge, defend, counter-argue instantly. And initially, her mind just froze.
What happened when she tried?
Her first attempts were pretty rough. She knew the ideas, she knew the words, but she couldn't get them out smoothly. Grammatically, maybe it was okay, but there was no natural rhythm. Her points didn't link together well, lots of pausing.
So how did she break through that freezing up, that deer in headlights feeling, and find her spontaneous voice?
Her philosophy professor gave her some really key advice. He said something like, Anya, your logical thinking in English is excellent. Now you need the language itself to feel automatic, to flow naturally. Stop aiming for perfectly correct sentences in the heat of the moment. Aim for effective arguments. And the best way to get there, start thinking in English.
Start thinking in English. That sounds simple, but also incredibly difficult. How do you actually do that?
She had to be really deliberate about it, like training a muscle. Instead of automatically thinking in German and then mentally translating, she forced herself to start doing her internal monologue in English.
Like narrating her day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Narrating her day, mentally arguing about news headlines, planning imaginary conversations, even drafting emails or to-do lists in her head, but always in English. And for the debates specifically, instead of writing out full speeches, she started using mind maps with just English keywords and key phrases.
Ah, so that forced her to generate the connecting language on the spot.
Yes, it bypassed the urge to prescript everything and forced her to construct sentences and arguments dynamically. She also joined Toastmasters, specifically for their impromptu speaking practice called Table Topics.
Oh yeah, where they give you a random topic.
Exactly. You get a question out of the blue and have to talk about it for a minute or two. Zero prep time.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
She said it was, initially, but also incredibly freeing. It taught her how to use natural filler words, well, and not just as nervous tics, but strategically, to buy a fraction of a second to think. just like native speakers do.
Okay.
She practiced paraphrasing quickly if she couldn't find the perfect word. She learned stock opening phrases like, "That's an interesting question." And she really focused on actively using linking words therefore, however, in addition, to make sure her spontaneous argument still had logical structure.
So what was the result of all this focus on internal processing and practice?
Slowly but surely, her whole internal approach shifted. That friction of mental translation just faded away. Her responses in debates became much quicker, more sophisticated, and they sounded way more natural and confident.
Wow.
She found she could actually express her complex philosophical points spontaneously, not just, correctly after deliberation. Getting into that debate, society successfully really came down to that internal shift, moving towards thinking and speaking on the fly, letting go of the need for prepackaged perfection.
Anya's story really highlights how much of the C1 jump is internal, isn't it? Actually thinking in the language. So, building on that, what are some concrete speaking strategies listeners can use to build that fluency and spontaneity?
Okay, so for building fluency and coherence, first, that thinking in English habit, make it deliberate, make it daily. Second, when you need to speak impromptu or give a presentation, use mind maps or brief notes, not full scripts. Force yourself to generate the language.
Right.
Third, actively master and use discourse markers and cohesive devices to make your speech flow logically. Fourth, practice paraphrasing and circumlocution, talking around a word or idea when you can't recall the exact term. It's a crucial skill.
Keeps the conversation moving.
Exactly. And surprisingly effective is storytelling practice. Tell anecdotes, summarize movies or articles aloud. It forces you to use descriptive language and very sentence structures naturally, making you sound less robotic.
All good points for sounding more natural. What about consciously boosting your vocabulary and grammar range when you speak? Not just knowing words, but using them.
Yes, essential for C1. You have to actively deploy the advanced vocabulary and idioms you learn. Don't just recognize them, use them. Consciously vary your sentence structures, mix simple and complex sentences.
Don't get stuck in a rut.
Precisely. Try using more complex grammatical forms where appropriate inversions, different conditional types, the passive voice. Get comfortable using common phrasal verbs and collocations, those word pairs that just sound right together. And, like with listening, recycle language. Notice good phrases native speakers use and deliberately try them out yourself. Turn that passive knowledge active.
It really is about activating what you already know. And pronunciation, intonation, how important are those for speaking effectively at C1?
Hugely important. Critical for how you're perceived and how easily you're understood. Focus on English rhythm and stress patterns. English is stress-timed, which is different from many languages, and getting that music right makes a massive difference to sounding natural. Understand and practice connected speech, how words naturally link together, sounds change or disappear. Use intonation deliberately to convey meaning, emotion, emphasis. It's not just about saying the words correctly.
And how can you work on this?
You absolutely have to record yourself speaking. Then listen back critically. It can be uncomfortable, but it's invaluable. Where do you hesitate? What sounds odd or unclear?
It takes guts to listen to yourself.
It does, but it's necessary. And don't be afraid to ask for specific feedback on your pronunciation and intonation from trusted native speakers or teachers. That combination of self-correction and external feedback is vital.
And the most basic advice of all.
Practice. It's non-negotiable. You simply have to find and create opportunities to speak. Talk with native speakers, talk with other advanced learners, join discussion groups, debate clubs, find online partners. Practice arguing, explaining, negotiating.
Role-playing, too.
Yeah, role-play different scenarios, job interviews, making complaints, whatever feels challenging. Explain concepts aloud to yourself. Summarize articles you've read. Honestly, it sounds simple, but the more you speak, the better and more fluent you become. There's no shortcut.
That really is the core truth, isn't it? Just doing it. Do you have one more story that maybe illustrates a different kind of C1 speaking challenge? Perhaps less about structure, more about confidence or authenticity?
Yes, definitely. Let's talk about Tayubo. He's an entrepreneur from South Africa, living and working in London. His written English was excellent, sharp business acumen. But he described himself as naturally shy, and he was extremely self-conscious about his South African accent.
Oh, okay.
He worried it made him hard to understand or maybe sounded less professional in that London environment. Networking events were apparently torture for him.
Oh, I can absolutely see how intense self-consciousness about your accent could just cripple you in those kinds of spontaneous, high-stakes conversations.
It can be a total killer for confidence, for making genuine connections. Taibo's turning point came after one particularly bad networking event where he felt He just completely failed to connect with anyone. He spoke to a mentor afterwards.
And what did the mentor say?
The mentor gave him some really profound advice. Basically told him, Taibo, look, your ideas are fantastic. Your accent, that's part of you. It's unique. It actually makes you memorable. Think of it as a strength, not a weakness.
Wow.
People, the mentor said, want to connect with a real person, not some kind of perfect speaking robot. Stop trying to sound like someone else. Focus instead on showing your genuine interest in other people and sharing your ideas authentically, even if every single word isn't perfectly pronounced.
That's such a powerful reframe. Shifting the goal from sounding perfect to being real and connecting. That must have felt liberating.
He said it was incredibly empowering, so he consciously changed his internal goal. It wasn't about achieving perfect native-like pronunciation anymore. It was simply about connecting with people authentically.
How did he put that into practice?
Well, he started really listening to how his British and American colleagues actually did small talk, noticing the natural rhythm, the phrases they used, learning it organically, not from a textbook. He recorded himself practicing his business pitch.
Okay.
But he wasn't just checking the script. He was listening for where he sounded stiff or unnatural, where his personality wasn't coming through. He actively worked on varying his intonation to sound more enthusiastic when he was enthusiastic, more curious when asking questions.
So, deliberately trying to project his authentic self through the way he spoke.
Exactly. And he deliberately pushed himself out of his comfort zone, joined an entrepreneurs group, forced himself to go to industry events, even volunteered somewhere, basically. Situations where he had to interact with lots of different people.
Setting small goals.
Yeah, he'd set a small goal for each event, like just initiate 3 conversations, no matter how nervous I feel. And crucially, within those conversations, his main focus shifted. It became about listening attentively to the other person, asking good follow-up questions and sharing relevant things about himself and his work, accepting that the delivery might not be perfectly polished every time.
And what was the effect of that shift in focus and practice?
His confidence just grew and grew. He realized that while clarity obviously matters, chasing this impossible ideal of perfection was actually what was stopping him from relaxing, opening up, and making those connections.
Right.
And interestingly, his actual fluency improved massively, simply because he was having more real conversations, where the pressure was focused on connection, not on flawless performance. His accent just became part of his professional identity, and people responded really well to his genuine interest in his strong ideas. Taibo's story beautifully shows that C1 speaking ultimately is about finding your own authentic voice in English and using it to genuinely connect.
These stories, Kenji overcoming the listening barriers, Sophia mastering her specific field, Anya finding that spontaneous voice, Taibo learning to connect authentically. They really paint such a rich, multifaceted picture of what C1 mastery actually involves.
They really do. And they all underline how listening and speaking at this advanced level, they aren't just separate skills you tick off in boxes.
No, not at all. They're so deeply interconnected, aren't they? Constantly feeding and reinforcing each other. All that deliberate, active listening we discussed, soaking up the natural patterns, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, the idioms.
That's the vital input that directly fuels your ability to produce similar language when you speak.
And then conversely, when you actively practice speaking, trying to formulate complex thoughts naturally, it makes your ears so much more sensitive to the nuances of how other people speak. It sharpens your listening.
It's this powerful positive feedback loop, a virtuous cycle, really. Think about it. Every single conversation you have is a mini feedback loop happening in real time. You speak, you observe the reaction, you listen to the response, boom, more input.
Right.
That constant back and forth is absolute gold dust for figuring out where you need to improve in both areas. If you find you consistently struggle to understand, say, a Scottish accent, well, there's a clear listening target for you.
Okay.
If you keep finding yourself unable to explain a particular concept clearly when you speak, that highlights a gap in vocabulary or maybe sentence structures that you need to work on for your speaking output.
So it's about consciously noticing that synergy. When you're listening, maybe thinking, okay, how would I phrase that? And when you're speaking, really tuning into the responses you get.
Precisely. It's this continuous cycle. Input, output, reflection, refinement. Now look, reaching C1 is a massive achievement, but it's also famous for being a level where people hit plateaus. Progress can feel painfully slow sometimes. What did the sources suggest for navigating that feeling?
Yeah, plateaus seem totally normal at this stage. The key advice was stay proactive and be willing to change your approach. So instead of a huge, vague goal like get better at English, set small, specific, achievable goals, micro goals.
Like what?
Like, this week, I will listen to one podcast episode featuring an Irish speaker, or this month, I'm going to actively try to use these 5 new phrasal verbs in conversations. Small, concrete steps.
Makes the big goals seem less overwhelming.
Exactly. And celebrate those small wins. You have to acknowledge every little bit of progress, even if it feels tiny. Also, crucially, change your mindset about mistakes. They aren't failures.
They're data.
Right. They're data points showing you exactly what needs work. Analyze why the mistake happened, learn from it, adjust, and if your study routine feels stale, just mix it up. Try new materials, find a different practice partner, attempt a totally different kind of exercise.
Variety keeps things fresh, breaks you out of a rut.
It does. And perhaps the most important piece of advice was to reconnect with your why, your core motivation. Why are you putting in all this effort to reach this high-level English? What opportunities will it create? What connections does it enable? That underlying purpose is your best fuel when things feel tough.
That's all really practical, solid advice for anyone feeling stuck at that C1 plateau.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth remembering that mastering C1 listening and speaking, it's a really transformative journey. It goes so far beyond just, grammatical accuracy. It's really about unlocking your own authentic voice in English, feeling confident enough to connect with people with complex ideas on a much deeper level. It's about handling tricky conversations with grace, expressing nuanced thoughts clearly, and understanding all those subtle, unspoken layers that make communication so rich and human.
It's moving from just transmitting information to truly engaging, understanding, and feeling understood.
Yeah. Exactly. And that journey, becoming that truly fluent, sophisticated, confident English user, well, it definitely takes ongoing immersion, deliberate, focused practice, and let's face it, a real willingness to keep pushing your comfort zone again and again, even when it's uncomfortable.
But as the stories we talked about, Kenji, Sophia, Anya, Taibo clearly show, with the right strategies, consistent hard work, and maybe most importantly, the right mindset, you absolutely can take your English listening and speaking skills to truly incredible levels.
Ultimately, this level of mastery is about equipping yourself so that your unique voice, your perspective, can be heard, understood, and potentially make an impact across the globe. Definitely something to think about as you continue on your own English journey. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into what is, well, arguably one of the most exciting stages in your English journey, but also maybe one of the most challenging.
Definitely. Hitting that C1 level.
Exactly. Specifically in listening and speaking. We've been digging into some really interesting source material for this one.
Yeah, trying to get to the core of what it takes, moving beyond just being pretty good.
To being genuinely fluent handling nuance.
That's it.
Yeah.
At C1, you've likely got the grammar sorted, mostly. You've got a decent vocabulary.
Right.
It stops being about just basic survival in the language. It's about, well, sophistication.
Yes, sophistication. That's a good word.
It's where you really start needing to navigate the subtleties, understand really complex arguments, keep up with native speakers talking fast.
And express yourself with precision. Flair, even.
Exactly. Precision and flair.
It's almost like you've built this amazing house, the structure of the language, and now you need to figure out how to actually live in it comfortably.
That's a great analogy. And for a lot of learners, this is precisely where you can hit that really frustrating C1 plateau.
Right. You feel stuck, even though you're putting in the work.
So our mission today, really, is to offer some solid strategies we've pulled from the material, things to help you push past that feeling.
And we're focusing on 2 main areas.
Yeah, 2 key things. First, how to sharpen up your listening comprehension, get it to a truly advanced level.
Okay.
And second, how to boost your speaking fluency so it matches that higher level of understanding.
Right. Let's jump straight into listening then, because C1 listening, it sounds like it's way more than just getting the gist of what someone's saying.
Oh, absolutely. Miles more. At C1, you're expected to pick up on implication, tone, even things like sarcasm, which can be tricky.
Yeah, understanding what isn't being said directly, the subtext.
Exactly. Can you follow abstract ideas? Can you figure out a speaker's attitude just from how they say something?
Can you keep up when the argument gets complicated, or they're speaking really fast, or maybe they have an accent you're not used to?
That's the level. It's a much, much deeper kind of processing.
And I think one of the big hurdles people face here is that panic on a word thing.
Okay, classic.
You hear one word you don't know, Your brain just zooms in on it, tries to decipher it.
And meanwhile, the rest of the conversation has just sailed past you. You lose the thread completely.
Exactly.
That's a classic C1 hurdle. And kind of related to that is just passive listening.
Right, like having English radio on in the background.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay for general exposure, maybe keeps things familiar, but it rarely pushes you to do the active, deep comprehension work you need at this level.
Your brain hears the sounds, but it's not really engaging with the meaning construction.
Precisely. It's not doing the heavy lifting of spotting patterns, predicting, connecting ideas.
Because at C1, you're essentially asking your brain to become this super sophisticated pattern spotting machine for the language, aren't you?
You are. You have to train it specifically to anticipate what might come next, to connect different bits of information, and crucially, to use the context to fill in the gaps when you do miss something.
So you don't panic on the word.
Right. You develop this almost intuitive sense of where the conversation is heading.
That intuitive sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds like the goal. Okay, let's make this more real. We found a story about a guy named Kenji, a software engineer.
Yeah, Kenji. His story's quite illuminating. He was from Japan, moved to London.
Okay.
Now, on paper, his English was excellent. He'd actually aced formal C1 exams.
Right, so technically proficient.
Very. But the reality of daily life in a busy London office, well, that was a whole different ballgame. Fast, informal chat, lots of different regional accents, people talking over each other.
Oh, I can just picture it. The chaos of real-world communication versus a quiet test room.
Exactly. He found it incredibly difficult.
So what was a specific issue for him? What did it feel like?
He described it really well. He said he felt like he understood each word but not the sentence. Or sometimes he'd get the sentence but miss the joke or the sarcasm.
Ah, okay. That's a perfect C1 symptom.
He even gave an example. A colleague said something like, "Oh, that's a bit rich," referring to a situation, not a price.
And he took it literally.
He genuinely thought they meant something was expensive, completely missed the irony, the idiomatic meaning.
Wow. Yeah, that nails the challenge. It's that cultural idiomatic layer on top of just knowing the words. So how did he get past that? What was the turning point?
Well, he had a British mentor who gave him some really, really good advice.
Okay.
The mentor told him, basically, stop trying to catch every single word.
Right. Stop focusing on the individual bricks.
Yeah. And instead, listen for the melody of the conversation.
The melody. I love that. What did that actually mean for Kenji in practice?
It meant shifting his focus, looking at the bigger picture, the main idea, the underlying feeling or attitude, paying more attention to nonverbal stuff too, like facial expressions.
Tuning into the whole performance of communication almost.
Exactly. Kenji later called it the intricate dance of communication. Less about decoding words one by one, more about understanding the overall rhythm and flow.
Okay, so less code breaking, more feeling the music.
Yeah.
What practical steps did he take to actually practice this different way of listening?
He got really deliberate about it. He started seeking out different accents, downloaded podcasts specifically with Mancunian, Scottish, Cockney speakers.
Actively seeking out the variety.
Yes. He also tuned into BBC radio dramas, watched quite nuanced British comedies, things like The Office, Peep Show.
Ooh, those are tough. So much relies on subtext and cultural understanding.
Exactly the point. You'd watch them first with English subtitles to get a baseline. Then, crucially, he'd push himself to watch again without them, really forcing his brain to rely on the sound and context.
Making it harder, forcing the skill development.
Right. He also started focusing on intonation patterns, how pitch and stress change meaning, and learning common phrasal verbs, not from sterile lists, but by noticing how people use them naturally in conversation.
Seeing them in action.
Yes. And another key thing, he started paying close attention to those little discourse markers, words like, mind you, having said that, to cut a long story short.
The signposts, the little words that kind of guide you through the speaker's thought process. Signal shifts.
Precisely. He saw them as signposts. Learning how they signal emphasis or a change in direction helped him anticipate where the speaker was going next.
That makes so much sense.
And the result? Within about 6 months, he said his listening felt transformed. He was understanding things in real time, following group chats, actually getting the implied meanings, the jokes.
And feeling more confident jumping in himself, presumably.
Absolutely. He felt much more able to participate naturally. Kenji's story really highlights that C1 listening isn't just about perfect vocabulary recall. It's about tuning into the whole dynamic system of how language works in real life.
That's a fantastic takeaway. So, Okay, building on Kenji's experience, what are some specific active listening techniques that, our listeners could start using right now to develop that melody awareness?
Okay, yeah, several key ones come to mind. First is selective attention and prediction.
Oh.
Instead of trying to grab every single sound, train your brain to focus on the likely keywords, think about the speaker's intention, and consciously try to predict what might come next based on the flow so far.
So you're sort of listening ahead, making educated guesses as you go.
Exactly. Which leads right into the second technique, contextual inference.
Inference, okay. Like being a detective.
Precisely. Act like a language detective. When you hit a word you don't know, don't panic and freeze up. Use everything around it, the other words, the tone, the topic, what you do understand, to make an educated guess about the meaning.
You often don't need the dictionary definition right that second.
Most of the time, no. You just need enough to follow the main point. It really helps avoid that panic on a word shutdown.
Okay, that's a good practical tip.
Yeah.
What else?
Mental summarization. This is quite powerful. While someone's talking, maybe during a pause or just continuously in the back of your mind, quickly rephrase their main points. Okay, so their basic argument is X.
Forces you to process the meaning, not just hear the words.
Exactly. It checks your comprehension in real time. And like Kenji found, actively noticing those discourse markers, however, therefore, in contrast, for example, is vital. There's the structure, the road signs.
Right. And then there's that final layer, the really C1 level stuff. Tone, emotion, implication.
Yes. This is huge at C1. How something is said often carries as much meaning, if not more, than what is said. Pitch, stress, speed, pauses. They communicate feeling, attitude, doubt, certainty.
Digging beneath the surface words.
That's exactly it. Understanding the feeling and the unstated message.
Okay, so we have these techniques. What about the actual stuff we should be listening to? What kind of content really pushes you at C1?
Well, variety is absolutely key. You need broad exposure. Go for things you're genuinely interested in: science, history, movies, whatever floats your boat, but push beyond the typical learner materials.
Right, time to graduate from the intermediate stuff.
Definitely. Think about quality news sources like NPR, podcasts like BBC Radio 4's In Our Time, which is brilliant but dense, or The Daily, Stuff You Should Know, Freakonomics Radio.
Why those kinds of things specifically?
It's the mix. Different topics, different speakers with different accents and styles, different formats, interviews, narratives, discussions. It gives your listening brain a much richer workout.
Okay. And visual media, TV shows, movies.
Oh, essential.
Yeah.
Advanced documentaries think David Attenborough's Our Planet or Planet Earth. They often use really rich vocabulary and complex sentence structures.
And dramas.
Sophisticated dramas are gold mines. Things like The Crown, Succession, Sherlock, maybe even House of Cards. They're packed with nuanced dialogue, idioms, cultural references, fast exchanges.
And the strategy there is watch with English subtitles first.
Yeah, get your bearings. Understand the plot and who's who. Then, the crucial step, watch it again without the subtitles. That's when your ears really have to do the work.
That second viewing sounds like the real training session.
It really is. And don't overlook challenging audio-only content. Difficult audiobooks, university lectures platforms like Coursera or ADX have tons of free content TED Talks on complex subjects.
Why audio only?
It trains your ear for sustained concentration on complex arguments without any visual cues to help you out. It builds listening stamina.
Makes sense. And accents. We talked about Kenji seeking them out. How can listeners systematically work on understanding different accents?
You just have to actively embrace the diversity. Make a conscious effort to find content from various English-speaking regions: Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, different parts of the US and UK.
Where do you find that easily?
Honestly, YouTube is an absolute goldmine for this. Search for creators, news reports, interviews from specific regions. Even listening to foreign films that have been dubbed into English can sometimes expose you to different delivery styles, though the quality varies.
The goal is just soaking your brain in the global sound of English.
Exactly. Your brain needs that varied input to build the pattern recognition for different accents. It gets easier with exposure.
Are there any more, focused practice exercises beyond just watching and listening for people who want to really drill down?
Yes, absolutely. If you really want to fine-tune your ear, transcription drills are incredibly effective.
Sounds intense.
They are. You take a short audio clip, maybe 30 to 60 seconds, listen to it over and over, and write down everything you hear, word for word.
Everything, including the ums and ahs.
Ideally, yes. Then, if you can find a transcript, compare yours. It shows you exactly where you're mishearing sounds or missing connected speech, or maybe not catching weak forms.
Wow, okay. Painstaking, but I can see the value. What
Yeah.
else?
Advanced shadowing is another good one. You listen to a native speaker, maybe a short phrase or sentence at first, and you repeat it immediately, trying to mimic everything.
Not just the words.
No, the pronunciation, the rhythm, the stress, the intonation, the whole music of their speech, it really helps internalize natural speech patterns.
Okay. And dictation.
Yeah, dictation is more about accuracy and memory. Someone reads a text aloud, or you use an audio recording, and you write down exactly what you hear. It tests as if you're catching the words correctly and holding them in your short-term memory.
So transcription for super detailed listening, shadowing for mimicking flow and sound, dictation for accuracy check. Those all sound very active.
They are. They force your brain to engage much more deeply than passive listening.
What about using tech? Any specific apps or tools?
Well, language exchange apps like HelloTalk or Tandem can be great, especially if you use the voice messaging feature.
How does that help listening specifically?
Because you have to listen really carefully to understand your partner's voice message, right? And then you have to formulate and record your own spoken reply. It forces active listening and gives you speaking practice in a real communicative context. It connects the two skills nicely.
That's a really practical way to use those apps. Okay, now you mentioned another story, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, who faced C1 listening challenges in a very specific context, medical English. How was her experience different from Kenji's general office environment?
It was quite different. Dr. Rodriguez, she's a cardiologist from Brazil. Her general English was actually excellent.
Okay.
But when she went to a big international medical conference, she suddenly felt completely lost during the discussions, the Q&As, the roundtables.
Was it just the technical jargon?
Not entirely. She said it wasn't just the specific medical terms, although those were there. It was also the field-specific abbreviations, the metaphors doctors used, and just how quickly they shifted topics without really obvious signposting. She described feeling adrift.
Right. Lost in this very specific, high-speed professional conversation style. So how did she tackle that?
She realized she needed targeted immersion, so she dove deep into English medical content. She subscribed to medical podcasts, read clinical reviews online, watched recordings of surgical case discussions.
Immersing herself in her professional world, but in English.
Exactly. But initially, she ran into a familiar problem. She kept stopping constantly to look up every single unfamiliar term.
The technical version of panic on a word.
Right, and just like with general English, it completely broke the flow. She couldn't follow the actual discussion.
So what did she change?
She changed her tactics. She decided to listen to whole podcast episodes or watch entire talks without stopping for every unknown word. Her new goal was simply to understand the overall discussion.
Like, what was the main problem being discussed? What were the solutions proposed? What was the conclusion?
Precisely. Focus on the big picture first. That felt much more manageable, especially with dense, specialized content.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Get the framework before worrying about every single detail.
Yeah. She also started watching recordings of conference talks and hospital grand rounds, but paying really close attention to how the English-speaking doctors structured their presentations. How did they introduce data? How did they handle questions politely? How did they summarize their key points?
Looking for the patterns in their communication style.
Exactly. And she started noticing recurring phrases, almost like formulas they use consistently.
Like what?
Things for introducing evidence, like, our data indicates that. Or for disagreeing politely, maybe, while I appreciate that point, I wonder if, or for summing up. So in essence, what we're seeing is...
So the discourse markers again, but tailored to that specific medical context. Finding the anchors in the conversation.
Exactly. She called it getting attuned to the symphony of medical English. By focusing on these structural patterns and accepting she wouldn't catch every single technical term immediately, her comprehension in her field improved dramatically.
So much so.
So much so that at the next conference, she wasn't just passively following along anymore. She felt confident enough to jump into the Q&A sessions, ask her own questions, even offer her own insights. Her focused listening practice basically unlocked her ability to fully engage professionally.
That's incredibly powerful. It really shows how C1 listening isn't a single skill, is it? It's about understanding the entire communication landscape, whether that's casual chat or highly specialized professional talk.
Absolutely. Predicting, inferring, reading the room, attuning to the specific symphony of that particular context.
It's fascinating how the brain adapts when you give it that targeted practice. It moves way beyond just word-for-word translation.
Yeah, it becomes much more about holistic understanding.
Okay, let's pivot now. We've covered listening in depth. Let's talk about the other side of that coin.
Hmm.
Advanced speaking fluency at the C1 level. If listening is about taking in that whole picture, what does C1 speaking really demand?
Well, C1 speaking is, again, so much more than just making yourself understood. That's maybe B2. At C1, it's about expressing yourself fluently, coherently, and appropriately across a really wide range of situations.
Appropriately is key there, isn't it? Adapting your style.
Hugely key. The focus shifts towards sounding natural, using idioms correctly, knowing when to be formal or informal. You're expected to be able to handle complex ideas, participate effectively in extended discussions, argue your point persuasively, and do it all with a certain level of sophistication.
But even with good understanding, people still hit walls with speaking at this level, right? It doesn't just magically happen once your listening improves.
Oh, not at all. There are several common roadblocks that persist even for advanced learners. A big one is overthinking grammar while you're trying to talk.
Yeah, that little grammar checker running in your head, slowing you down.
Exactly. It leads to hesitation, pauses, and just sounding, well, unnatural, stilted.
You know the rule, but you can't apply it smoothly in real-time speech.
Right. Another common issue is relying on the same familiar vocabulary or sentence structures over and over again, even though your passive knowledge, what you understand when reading or listening, is much broader.
You don't activate the fancier words you know.
Precisely. Then there's the difficulty with spontaneity. That classic deer in the headlights moment when someone asks you something unexpected or you have to speak off the cuff.
Ah, yes, the mind just goes completely blank.
Totally blank. And then you have those stubborn, fossilized errors, mistakes you've been making for so long they just feel impossible to shake.
Little grammar gremlins.
Pretty much. And often underpinning all of this is a persistent fear of making mistakes. That fear makes you hold back, stick to safe language, and avoid trying out new words or more complex sentences.
And that fear factor just clamps down on fluency, doesn't it?
It absolutely kills fluency. And this is where that listening-speaking connection we keep talking about becomes so incredibly vital. Because all that rich, varied listening input, the patterns, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, the natural flow, the idioms, that's the raw material your brain needs to produce fluent, natural-sounding speech. You simply can't output what you haven't sufficiently taken in. Input fuels output.
Such a critical link. They're not separate skills to be learned in isolation. They feed each other constantly.
Especially at this advanced level.
Okay, so let's illustrate this journey towards C1 speaking fluency. Tell us about Anya.
Right, Anya. She was a German philosophy student, and her theoretical English, her reading and writing, absolutely brilliant. She could handle incredibly complex philosophical texts, write sophisticated essays.
Impressive.
Yeah, she could even manage a decent conversation if she had time to prepare her thoughts. But her goal, her challenge, was she wanted to join the university's English Debate Society.
Ooh, debating.
Oh,
That's throwing yourself in the deep end. Fast-paced, unpredictable.
exactly. That was the terror for her. As she put it, in a debate, you can't be translating in your head. You can't plan your sentences perfectly in advance. You have to react now. You have to challenge points, defend your position, think on your feet.
And her mind just froze.
Completely froze.
Yeah.
Her first few attempts, she said, were really tough. She knew the vocabulary, her grammar wasn't bad, but she just couldn't get the words out smoothly. There was no natural rhythm, and she really struggled to connect her ideas logically in that real-time pressure cooker.
So she had the knowledge locked away, but couldn't access and deploy it spontaneously. What helped her break through that barrier? Was there specific advice?
Yes, her professor gave her some advice that she said was pivotal. He told her, Anya, you clearly understand the logic in English. You can follow complex arguments. Now, he said, you need the feel of the language.
The feel. Interesting.
He continued, stop aiming for perfectly correct sentences every time. Instead, aim for effective arguments. And the best way to achieve that feel, that effectiveness, you need to start thinking in English.
Ah, the big one. Thinking directly in the target language. That's a huge mental shift for so many people. How does she actually practice that?
She got very conscious about it. Instead of defaulting to German in her head, she started narrating her daily activities to herself silently in English. Okay, now I'm making coffee. I need to find the filter, that kind of thing.
Inner monologue practice.
Yeah. She'd mentally argue about news headlines she read, plan imaginary conversations she might have later, even draft emails in her head, all directly in English, bypassing German.
Wow.
And specifically for her debate practice, this was key. She stopped writing out full speeches or even detailed notes. Instead, she started using mind maps with just English keywords and core phrases.
Oh, that's clever. It gives you structure but forces you to create the connecting language on the spot.
Exactly. It forced the spontaneity. She said it was incredibly effective. She also joined Toastmasters.
Ah, for public speaking practice.
Specifically for their impromptu speaking sessions called table topics. They give you a random topic, and you have to stand up and speak about it coherently for 1 or 2 minutes, completely off the cuff.
Terrifying.
She said it was terrifying at first, yes, but ultimately really freeing. It trained her to think on her feet. She also learned to use filler words, well, naturally, like native speakers do, to buy herself a fraction of a second to think without sounding awkward.
Right, using them strategically.
And she practiced paraphrasing. If she couldn't find the perfect word instantly, she'd talk around it. Learned useful phrases like, "That's an interesting question," to give her brain a moment.
Buys you a second.
Exactly. And she consciously focused on using linking words and phrases. Therefore, however, in addition, on the other hand, to make her arguments flow logically, even if she wasn't speaking perfectly fluently yet. It gave her coherence.
So what was the overall result of all this?
The result was that the friction of mental translation just faded away. Her responses in debates became quicker, more sophisticated. She sounded much more confident because she was more confident in her ability to think and react in English. She could finally express herself spontaneously and effectively, not just correctly after careful planning.
Her success really came down to that internal shift, didn't it? Thinking and speaking on the fly, letting go of perfectionism in favor of communication.
Absolutely. Anya's story really drives home that C1 speaking isn't just about having the knowledge. It's about developing the mental agility to use it spontaneously and coherently.
Okay, so building on Anya's experience and what we know works, what are some concrete strategies listeners can use to boost their C1 speaking? Let's break it down.
Okay, first focus on building that fluency and coherence. The thinking in English practice Anya did, narrating your day, mentally rehearsing is fundamental. Try using mind maps instead of full scripts for any speaking practice, especially impromptu stuff.
Forces the brain to connect the dots live.
Exactly. Master those discourse markers and cohesive devices. Furthermore, consequently, nevertheless, similarly, they are the glue that holds your speech together logically. Practice paraphrasing and circumlocution, talking around a word you've forgotten. It's a vital skill.
Keeps you from getting stuck and shutting down.
Right. And practice storytelling. Tell anecdotes, summarize articles or talks you've heard. It naturally pushes you to use more descriptive language and vary your sentence structures, making you sound less robotic.
Good tips for flow. What about vocabulary and grammar in actual speech?
Okay, second area. Boosting your active vocabulary and grammar range. You have to consciously use the advanced words and idioms you learn from listening and reading. Don't just passively recognize them. Deploy them in conversation.
Make them your own.
Yes. Actively work on varying your sentence structures. Make simple, compound, and complex sentences. Don't just use subject, verb, object all the time. Get comfortable using more complex grammatical forms, inversions, conditionals, passive voice where they fit naturally.
Don't shy away from them.
Exactly. Focus on common phrasal verbs and collocations, those word pairings that just sound right together to a native ear. And, like with listening, recycle language. Hear a good phrase a native speaker uses. Note it down. Try using it yourself later.
Taking that passive knowledge and forcing it into active use.
That's the core of it. Third area, pronunciation and intonation. These are hugely important at C1 for how clear, natural, and engaging you sound.
Right. It's not just about being understood, but sounding.
Yeah, sounding fluent and confident. Focus on English rhythm and stress patterns. English is a stress-timed language, which is different from many others. Practice connected speech, how words naturally link together and change sound. Use intonation effectively to convey meaning, emotion, emphasis.
How do you practice that effectively?
You really have to record yourself speaking. It can be uncomfortable,
Definitely.
but it's invaluable. Listen back critically. Where do you hesitate? Where does your intonation sound flat or unnatural? What sounds are difficult?
And get feedback if you can.
Absolutely. Ask trusted native speakers or advanced learners for honest feedback on your pronunciation. That cycle of practice, self-correction, and external feedback is crucial. And finally, the foundation for everything. Practice, practice, practice.
The non-negotiable part.
Totally non-negotiable. Seek out every opportunity to speak. Language exchange partners, online discussion groups, local clubs, debate societies like Anya joined. Practice arguing, explaining, persuading spontaneously. Role-played different situations, job interviews, making complaints, giving presentations. Explain complex topics out loud to yourself. Summarize
The
talks.
more miles you put on your speaking engine.
The smoother it runs. There really is no substitute for actually speaking.
Got it. Okay, do we have one more story maybe illustrating a different angle on the C1 speaking challenge?
Yes, let's talk about Taibo. His situation was a bit different again. He's an entrepreneur from South Africa, living and working in London.
Good.
His written English was excellent, great business mind, but he was naturally quite shy. And he was intensely self-conscious about his South African accent when speaking English.
Ah, the accent anxiety. That holds so many advanced learners back.
It really does. For Taibo, networking events were absolute torture. He felt like he was putting on a performance, constantly worrying if people were understanding him properly, judging his accent. That self-consciousness just completely froze his ability to have natural, spontaneous conversations.
I can totally relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
When you're preoccupied with how you sound, it's almost impossible to focus on the actual conversation, listening to the other person.
Exactly. It creates this huge mental barrier. His breakthrough actually came after one particularly bad networking night. He was talking to a mentor afterwards, feeling really discouraged.
And the mentor said,
The mentor gave him a really powerful perspective shift. He said something like, Taibo, your ideas are excellent. Your business sense is sharp. Your accent, that's part of who you are. It makes you unique. Think of it as a strength, not a weakness. He went on, people ultimately want to connect with someone genuine, someone real, not some kind of perfect robot speaker. Focus on showing your interest in them, sharing your great ideas authentically. It doesn't have to be perfectly pronounced to be valuable.
that's such an empowering way to reframe it, shifting the goal from unattainable perfection to achievable connection and authenticity.
It completely changed Taibo's mindset. He made a conscious decision to stop chasing phonetic perfection and start focusing on making genuine connections.
How did that translate into action?
Well, he started learning useful small talk phrases, but not from a textbook. He paid attention to how his British and American colleagues chatted naturally before meetings or over coffee. He listened for the real rhythm and vocabulary of casual connection.
Learning from observation.
Yeah. He also started recording himself practicing his business pitch. But instead of just listening for grammar errors, he listened for where he sounded stiff or monotonous or unnatural. He worked specifically on varying his intonation to sound more enthusiastic, more curious, basically, letting his personality come through his voice more.
So delivering the energy, not just the words.
Exactly. And crucially, he forced himself out of his comfort zone repeatedly. He joined an entrepreneurs meetup group, went to more industry events, even volunteered for a project that required lots of interaction. He deliberately put himself in situations where he had to talk to lots of different people.
Exposure therapy almost.
Kind of. He set himself small, manageable goals for each event. Like, okay, tonight, just initiate 3 conversations, no matter how nervous I feel.
Breaking it down.
Yes. And most importantly, he said, within those conversations, he consciously shifted his primary focus. Instead of worrying about his own speaking, he focused intensely on listening attentively to the other person, asking good follow-up questions, showing genuine interest, and then sharing relevant things about himself and his work, even if the words weren't perfectly polished.
He shifted from being the speaker under scrutiny to being an active, engaged participant in a two-way interaction.
Precisely. And the effect was dramatic. His confidence grew immensely. He realized that while clarity obviously matters, his crippling obsession with an impossible ideal of perfect pronunciation was the real barrier preventing him from connecting with people.
And his fluency improved just from talking more.
His fluency improved massively simply because he was having more real, lower-stakes conversations. He got more comfortable. His accent didn't disappear, but it became just part of his professional identity, part of his authentic self. And people responded really well to his genuine interest, his enthusiasm, and his excellent ideas.
Taibo's story is fantastic. It really underscores that C1 speaking ultimately is about finding your authentic voice accent and having the confidence to use it to genuinely connect with others.
It's less about erasing your linguistic background and more about owning your ability to communicate effectively and authentically through it.
The permission he gave himself to be authentic was the key that unlocked his fluency. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's a powerful lesson.
So these stories we've discussed. Kenji learning to hear the dance of conversation. Sophia navigating the specific symphony of medical talk. Anya finding her spontaneous voice by changing how she thought. and Taibo connecting authentically by embracing his accent. They paint such a rich, multi-layered picture of what C1 English really involves.
And they all circle back to that fundamental point. Listening and speaking are not separate skills learned in isolation. They are deeply fundamentally interconnected. They constantly reinforce each other, especially at this advanced level.
Absolutely. The more actively and deeply you listen, the more you absorb those natural patterns, the vocabulary, the idioms, the flow.
And that directly feeds your brain the material it needs to produce more natural-sounding speech.
And conversely, the more you push yourself to speak actively using complex ideas and structures.
The more sensitive you become to the nuances of spoken English when you listen, it sharpens your ear.
It really is a positive feedback loop, isn't it? A virtuous cycle.
Definitely. Think of every conversation as a mini feedback opportunity. You speak, you observe the reaction, you listen to the response. That's more input. That real-time back and forth is absolute gold for diagnosing your own strengths and weaknesses.
Like if you consistently miss things when someone with a particular accent speaks, that's a listening target.
Exactly. Or if you find yourself struggling to explain a complex idea clearly, that tells you where you need to work on vocabulary or sentence structure for speaking.
So we should really consciously try to lean into that synergy. When you're listening, actively think, okay, how would I phrase that?
Yeah, or what's the underlying structure here?
And when you're speaking, pay close attention to the reactions and responses you get. Really listen.
It becomes this continuous cycle, input, output, reflection, refinement. That's how you keep moving forward at these higher levels.
Now, even with all these strategies, let's be real. Hitting plateaus at C1 is incredibly common. It's just part of advanced language learning. Progress isn't always a smooth upward curve.
Absolutely normal, and it can feel discouraging. What's the best advice for maintaining momentum when you feel like you're stuck in the mud?
I think the key is staying proactive, but also being kind to yourself. First, break down that huge, intimidating goal, master C1 English, into tiny, specific, achievable micro goals.
Bite-sized chunks.
Exactly. Things you can actually accomplish and tick off, like, this week I will listen to one 30-minute podcast with an Irish accent, or this month I will try to use these 5 new phrasal verbs in conversation, or I'll record myself speaking for 2 minutes about a news article 3 times this week.
Makes progress feel more tangible.
Definitely. And related to that, celebrate the small wins. Acknowledge every little bit of progress. Maybe you understood a joke you wouldn't have before, or you used a complex sentence structure correctly without thinking too hard. Pat yourself on the back for those moments.
Keeps motivation up.
It does. Also, fundamentally shift how you think about mistakes. They're not failures. They're not signs you're bad at English. They are simply data.
Data points showing you where to focus.
Precisely. Figure out why the mistake happened. Was it grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation? Learn from it, adjust your practice, and move on. Don't dwell on it emotionally. And finally, mix things up. If your current routine feels stale and you're not seeing progress, try something new. Listen to a different type of content. Find a new conversation partner. Try a different practice exercise like shadowing or transcription.
Keep it fresh. Prevent boredom from setting in. Don't let the plateau become stagnation.
Exactly. And maybe the most important thing when you hit a plateau, reconnect with your why. Why are you putting in all this effort? What's your deeper purpose for wanting this high level of English?
Reminding yourself of the goal.
Yeah. Whether it's for your career, for travel, for connecting with people, for accessing information, or just for the personal satisfaction of mastery, that underlying purpose is your best fuel when the journey feels tough.
Those are all really practical, solid strategies for navigating those inevitable C1 plateaus.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive today, I think it's become really clear that mastering C1 listening and speaking, it goes so far beyond just ticking off grammar rules or vocabulary lists.
It's much more profound than that.
It's really about unlocking your own authentic voice in English. It's
Yes.
about connecting with people, with ideas, with different cultures on a much deeper level than was possible before.
It's having the confidence to navigate complex situations, express your own complex thoughts clearly and persuasively.
And understanding all those subtle, unspoken layers that make human communication so rich and sometimes so tricky.
It's that fundamental shift, isn't it? From just transmitting information to genuinely engaging, truly understanding, and feeling truly understood.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, that journey to becoming a truly fluent, sophisticated, confident C1 and beyond English user, it does require ongoing immersion. It requires deliberate, targeted practice. And it requires a consistent willingness to step outside your comfort zone again and again.
Just remember the stories we talked about. Kenji learning to hear the melody to beat the accent barrier. Sophia mastering her field-specific symphony. Anya finding her spontaneous voice by changing her internal thinking process. And Taibo learning to connect authentically by embracing, not erasing, his uniqueness.
They all show that with the right mindset, the right techniques, and sustained, focused effort, you absolutely can take your English listening and speaking to incredible new levels.
Levels where your unique voice, your unique perspective can genuinely be heard, understood, and make the impact you want it to make globally.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? As you push towards that C1 level and beyond, here's a final thought to consider. Maybe the ultimate skill isn't achieving some abstract ideal of linguistic perfection. Maybe, just maybe, it's developing the confidence to our full, authentic self with all your unique experiences, your unique perspective, and yes, maybe even your unique accent into every English conversation, trusting that your ideas, your contribution, and the connection you make, that's what matters most.